I think if we had laid off people earlier, we would have extended our runway past December. But when it was actually brought up that we needed to lay people off, I couldn't accept it because it's not that they are doing their jobs badly. It was just because I couldn't pay them. And I was being so emotional. I was like, no one is telling me anything. I'm going to fix this and I'm going to bring in more money and we are going to keep these people. And then our chief operating officer, she called me and I was like, we actually have to lay off people. We've gone 1 month. There's no money yet. We can't keep being optimistic. I remember I cried. I was like, oh my God, I built out in a really great team. To see actually everyone go was really, really painful.
Welcome to Crypto at Scale. My name is Justin Norman, and in today's episode, my co-host Wera Kiwana and I welcome Lazerpay's Njoku Emmanuel to the show. As you may know, Lazerpay announced that it would be shutting its doors in April of 2023. The startup, which was founded at the height of the crypto bull market in 2021, and to much fanfare around Njoku, who was just 19 years old at the time, promised to bring seamless crypto payments to Africa. But since its shutdown, a lot has been said in the ecosystem about the company and its shortcomings. So we wanted to get the story directly from Njoku himself. If you enjoyed this episode of Crypto at Scale, please subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, and share with a friend or a colleague who you think may enjoy it as well. Crypto at Scale is not investment advice and is for entertainment purposes only. This episode of Crypto at Scale is brought to you by Ripple. Anyone who sent money across borders to or within Africa knows how cumbersome, expensive, and slow the process can be. When it comes to remittances, Sub-Saharan Africa remains the most expensive region to send money to. And for businesses, trapped capital, slow settlements, and high failure rates pose major challenges. The current financial infrastructure just doesn't work very well for the modern global economy. Ripple believes that crypto-enabled payments can help. Ripple's payment solution, on-demand liquidity, enables organizations to settle global payments in real time at a fraction of the cost and without tying up working capital and destination accounts. By leveraging the digital asset XRP as a bridge currency, funds can be sent and received in local currency on either side of a transaction. And across Africa, Ripple is partnering with local financial institutions and fintechs to bring the benefits of better cross-border remittances to the region. To learn more and get in contact with the Ripple team, head over to ripple.com.
Njoku, thank you so much for joining us, for your willingness to tell your story. We'd like to start at the beginning of this story. It was 2021, and you had many lucrative opportunities to work in the global crypto ecosystem that you ultimately chose to leave aside to build Lazerpay. Can you tell us what the vision for the company was and when you and your co-founders set out to build in the early days?
Thanks a lot for having me, Wera and Justin. So yeah, first off, I was already working in the global crypto space. At the time, I was at MakerDAO, and which is a leading centralized finance institution, right? And I was also contracting at Nestcoin as a senior blockchain engineer. So the whole idea about of Lazerpay just came up in, I think, somewhere around June, July 2021. And then, I called, my co-founder, Abdul, who was our CTO, and, told him about the idea to build a crypto payment gateway, pretty much a blockchain payments powered infrastructure. I think then we're calling it a smart contract enabled infrastructure for payments, right? That would actually, make it easier for merchants to accept payments in crypto. And also make it easy for people to actually spend their crypto. And he told me that he was already doing something like this, that it aligns pretty much with what he's working on. And the next week he was in Dubai, and we pretty much started building it out. So that's how we started. That's how we started off. Just I and Abdul building out the core infrastructure of Lazerpay and building out the platform. And then we brought on Justice, who eventually turned become lead engineer to handle everything front end related, and also our lead product designer. And also we got a third co-founder who would be in charge of business development and operations, while I focus on the products, and Abdul focus on the technical bit of things. So that's pretty much how we started. And then sometime in August, it was actually becoming real, right? The platform was all coming together in a very short period of time. And then I told Yele about it. I told Yele about my vision to actually enable people to, get crypto to like that point where people are comfortable, like, spending crypto. I wanted to like, show people that crypto was not just like, crypto was not just like, an asset for trading. You could actually like, use it as part of your daily lives, right? And to also show merchants that, that they're actually restricted by their borders because they only like sell or they only like, accept payments in their local currency, right? But then they can actually like, have access to like the entire world, right? By accepting stable coins as like, a means of payment. And Yele was sold by the idea and, and then like, he made an investment in Lazerpay and like, that was like our first ever investment. And then, he told me that now like, I'm actually building a business and it's totally different from like, just building a product or just like, leading an engineering team. Right. So I had to like, leave Nestcoin and like, quit my other jobs, which I actually had and like, turn down all the other offers. I had to like, focus full time on Lazerpay.
And Njoku, so I know all told you raised about $1 million and then, you had some pretty good initial traction. It was a bull market and the company grew pretty meaningfully in terms of headcount. I think you said at the peak, it grew to 15 people. So can we just talk a little bit about that period of time? So you set out, you raised some money, the company grew, you had some traction. Like how was the business doing and what was, that year or two like for you as you were building the business?
I think at peak, like our headcount was around like 24, 25. So we actually like, grew that large in like, such a short period of time. But then in that time where we're actually like, growing like, our headcount and stuff, we were pretty much like, focused heavily on like, product development. So at the time, right, like, we focused mainly on like, two things, growth and marketing and like, basically putting the brand out there, letting people know that, oh, crypto is not a scam. Like, this is what you can actually use crypto for. So we needed to like, do a lot of like, education for them to even like, say, oh, okay, I want to actually like, integrate this on my platform to accept payments. Right. And then the second pillar we're actually focused on heavily, which I actually led was product development. So we actually wanted to like, be the best products out there, right? And then I usually call Lazerpay like, the pay stack for crypto because I really love pay stack engineering culture and actually how they like, ship like, excellent products. So for us, right, like getting a product that works was like, priority. And we kept on like, iterating. We like, onboarded a few businesses. We actually like, got like these businesses to like, start transacting. While they were transacting, we're talking to these businesses directly and like, iterating on like, our platform, right? Like the version one of Lazerpay and like, what Lazerpay looks like today is like a whole lot different. So like my focus at the point was basically like, heavily on product development and like, making sure that like, we never have like, any downtime on like, our engineering since like, we're like a business, like, we're actually like, building APIs for like businesses. We like, had like, this zero tolerance for like, for any failure around like, our engineering or products bit of things, right? So that was pretty much what, we're focused on. And then we also onboarded, quite like, a number of businesses, right? And, these businesses we onboarded were basically like, through, founders that I knew, that were pretty much like, that we saw like, a use case for like their business or like people that actually just found us online. Actually, like, we got a lot of traction from businesses that found us online and started like, using us, especially businesses that were not in Nigeria, which was actually like, our core target audience and like, our core focus markets pretty much. Right. So we didn't like, do any like, heavy sales or BD at like, at the early stages of like, Lazerpay. So like, 6 months in, we weren't like, really doing much, business development or sales. We're pretty much like, focused heavily on like, product development and like, building like, the product. Right. So that was like, core focus at like, peak. So yeah, that's like, pretty much how like, the business was shaped at like the early stages. And we kept on like, hiring people, mostly people on like the product team and also like, the growth team as well. We didn't really focus much on hiring anyone like, on like the BD or sales team, right? Until like later in 2022.
Yeah, so that sounds like an interesting arc. Honestly, I remember back to that time, we were all, on lockdown, COVID was ravaging the world, but crypto was just on fire. Like everyone people were buying NFTs. Like I was, using learning about stablecoins, starting to use stablecoins in 2021, and things were kind of taking off. It was a really exciting time. But we do know that at some point, 2022, things started to trend downward, and we started to see a bit of a bear market, which coincided with an also downward trend for Lazerpay yourselves. So this is roughly when you announced company layoffs in November of last year. Can you talk a little bit about what was happening in terms of traction and uptake of the product, and how the going from bull market to bear market was for Lazerpay?
During the bear market, we actually saw traction, right? On the platform itself, right? Like most of our highest number of transactions and total processed volume at the point was pretty much, during the bear market, right? We saw a lot of huge amounts of money moving within and outside Lazerpay. I'm going to give a bit of context around why it seemed the bear market was pretty much the most terrible for us, right? It was from 2021 down to 2022, right? We had a high burn actually, right? Investing a lot in product development. We're investing a lot in security. We did a ton of audits on our smart contracts and our APIs, and then we're also investing in growth and events marketing as well. So our burn was high, and at the rates which we're going at, right? It happened that at the time when we needed to scale pretty much because of the volumes we started seeing, right? That was also the time where we needed to raise more money to actually have enough runway to carry us through the bear market. Then before we even started raising funds, started a proper seed round, our metrics kind of changed, right? Where it was at first revenue wasn't top of my list. Right. Be honest, revenue wasn't top of my list at first. Right. So in the bear market, we actually hired a head of partnerships. Right. And, when she came in, a lot of things around business development and sales, changed in the organization. Right. We had a proper sales structure. Maybe I should have done that since day one. Right. I think one of my biggest mistakes, right? Wasn't bringing her on early enough. So we had a head of partnerships. There was actually the employees within the organization, everyone within the organization could actually feel there was this change in terms of, we are actually making money, right? We're actually bringing in businesses that actually brings in volumes. So it was at the time, so that was why I said the bear market was actually the period where we had the highest number of transactions, right? That was actually when we hired this head of partnership. She became my right hand man, and actually took out a lot of pressure on me in respect to business operations, right? So she basically was filling in for the role of a chief operating officer, right? And operations internally and externally got extremely better. So we started thinking about other business models, right? I think this is also something that, I wasn't thinking about early on, right? Where we're just making money on incoming payments, right? But then we now started thinking about ways where we could leverage our architecture and leverage because we built an entire blockchain infrastructure suite, right? So we started thinking around how we can leverage this to make more money. And we introduced our on-ramps and off-ramp feature, right? The APIs part and liquidity parts. We also introduced, instant swap. So you can swap between stable coins as well, right? So, we started building out, we also started building out components that were going to lead to a subscription-based business, right? And then that was around the time we started raising our seed round. So at the time we were raising our seed round, so I mean, I basically went out to do the fundraise pretty much, right? I went out to do the fundraise. So taking us back to the $1 million raise, we raised 400K earlier in 2021, and then we now did another so we started we raised 600K in addition to the 400K, right? Around very early 2022, right? So that was going to be the beginning of our seed round. So we paused it, ramped up growth, so that we can actually go back and raise more money to actually expand our runway to execute what we had. So we onboarded a couple of businesses that were going to do up to $1 million in transaction volume, which translated to like, $10,000 in, revenue for us, right? Like baseline revenue for us. And we onboarded like, 5, 6 of these businesses, right? And, in this, so that would have like, translated to like, 50 to 60K in revenue for us, like, right? And then still like, the process, this business is actually like, integrated our platform, right? Some for like, off-ramp and on-ramps, some for like, crypto payments, right? Which was going to be where a chunk of like, our revenue was going to come from. But then we ran into like a major blocker. And at the time where like, these businesses were supposed to like go live, then we realized that, their compliance shut it down. And then we realized that, regulations regulations in our market is actually like, the core problem that will actually like, run into and to be like, the biggest blocker. So that was pretty much like, what happened around that time, where we're basically like, building a bear market, raising money and trying to like, structure our operations properly.
Yeah, I think one thing I want to pick out of that story, because that sounds like such a, crazy time. Like you guys, like Njoku, at heart, you're a hacker, right? You and your team are hackers. You guys are engineers. You just want to get in the weeds, build the really cool things, and you did that, right? And one thing that I really want to make sure that comes through with this story is that was what you started with. You really wanted to build a good product, and you built a phenomenal product, right? And then just so happened that a bear market came, and that's also when you were raising, and then started having to think about like commercials and all these other things. But the beauty of that time sounds like you found that product market fit, which is something that we talk about a lot on this podcast and in our work. Even Njoku, you and I have talked about it before. Is this thing about the utility of crypto and specifically stablecoins? And when I first heard about Lazerpay, what blew me away was that you guys clearly on the website said we're only touching stablecoins, and that like click right there. That's exactly what is really the utility of crypto for payments in Africa is making it easy to understand, easy to use. So it's really great that you guys were able to do that. Can you like tell us a little bit about, there was a time obviously in that, right, that you started you moved from hacking to now building a business, and one thing really that was talked about was in the media in the last few weeks is about the inability to sell to enterprises. So I don't know if this was fair or not, but there were some titans in the industry like E from Future Africa who brought up the topic of your age, and alluding to that being a factor in missteps, like a lack of focus on selling to enterprise. From what it looks like, it sounds like you were building and learning in real time. So can you tell us a little bit about that time, please?
My age has never come up, in any business meeting that, I attend, right? Like, I get into rooms where people that are way older than me can't like, even set their foot like, close, right? So I don't think like the problem was my age. Like no one ever like, asked like, how old, I was at the time. And instead, like, I think my age was actually like, was even like, a good factor for us, right? Because like, the time where the like, when like, partners or investors actually like, hear how old I was at the time, they were actually like, they were really surprised at like, what we were able to like, achieve, or what I've been able to like, achieve at, that's young age, right? So I would say like, the age was actually like, was a good factor in like progress of like, Lazerpay, and not necessarily like, the reason why the business didn't work, right? Or why like, we basically like, ran out of funds and stuff, right? As you said, like, it was a very new experience for me, and I was learning on the job, right? Like, before Lazerpay, right? Like what I did was like, leading teams, like, leading product teams and like, building out engineering products, right? But then starting to think of like, stuff like fundraising, finance, like, legal stuff, right? I was, actively like, learning on the job. And, I'm grateful that I actually had like, great mentors and like, great partners who didn't like, look down on me because of my age, but like, they actually like, taught me how to like, go through this process. And, when, also around the comments that like, my age was, basically the reason why like, we couldn't sell to like, enterprise businesses. I don't think that's actually like, true, right? First off, right, like no matter how old anyone is, like, what matters in any room is pretty much the amount of knowledge you have at the point and like, how much value you actually like, bring to the table. So that was what people were looking at, not necessarily like, how old I am, right? Like what mattered to me, I don't even think about my age. What matters to me is pretty much how much do I know about this particular subject, and how much network, do I actually like, have as well. So I would say like, I never think about my age, right? So it's like, I see a problem, I'll go out and like, I'll build like a solution for that problem. And, I wouldn't wait until I'm 50 before I start like, solving problems, right? Like, you actually like, life is all about learning, right? And you actually like, learn on the job and you learn as you go, right? And so with respect to like, selling to like, enterprise, right? The major problem around like, our business not working or us not like being able to like, scale was not the fact that we couldn't sell to enterprise. We tried selling to enterprise in Nigeria, right? But like that was when we realized, and when I told you about like the number of businesses we onboarded that were going to like bring in over 60K in revenue, right? When our head of partnerships like came into like man business operations, right? We realized that the problem was not even selling to these guys. The problem was like regulations, right? So we underestimated the impact regulations could actually have on our business, and not us not being able to sell to enterprise, right? We spoke to like, think of like, I think like, I've told you this where around like, who we actually spoke to during the course of like the business, right? Like, think of like the biggest payment gateways, in Africa or in Nigeria, right? We got into the room with like the highest level, like the highest person in the organization, and we sold to them, right? But then the problem was compliance always shuts it down, right? Because the regulatory framework around crypto in Nigeria, which was our core market, was not clear at all. And these enterprise businesses, they don't want to like, put their business in harm or like put their business at the mercy of like the central bank, because they wanted to like, add like, crypto to like their offerings, right? So that was the problem. And we realized that late. We realized that, maybe we would have not started from the African markets. Maybe we would have started from like, the Middle Eastern markets, right? But like, that was like, regulations was actually like, the biggest problem we faced, and not being able to sell to enterprise on my age.
You know what, I think that you've articulated it so well. Like, this is, like, I always say that if someone tells you that they're a crypto expert, they're lying to you. Like, people, to be an expert, you have to be doing this thing for like 20 years, right? That means that we're all learning this stuff in real time, especially people who are brave enough and bold enough to build businesses in this space. And that's something that was really commendable. I think something that we don't appreciate much about founders of crypto startups is that they're really just like, they're really pioneers. And even companies like MFS Africa, like, Stripe, for example, Visa, like larger incumbents who are now embracing crypto are doing it a lot slower and a lot more deliberately. But like that can only have been done by people who were forging a path early and learning these lessons that you learned already. So one thing I want to kind of touch on is how commendable it was that you chose to be radically transparent throughout this whole time. You were upfront, honest on Twitter, in interviews about like what we were building. You shared news and learnings as they happened, and you continue to do so. And I think that one thing that was commendable is that you did that with bad news, and I think that's something that you should be very proud of. I think, when you guys had layoffs last year and the shutdown. So in an ecosystem where this isn't the norm, can you tell us a little bit about your decision to be transparent as a core value for Lazerpay, and especially blockchain, for example, or public blockchains? They're by definition, they're transparent, they're public. Can you tell us a bit about your thinking about the ethos of transparency at Lazerpay?
When we actually started Lazerpay, again, I look up to like Shola of Paystack and Yele of Nestcoin, right? These are like people who are mentors to me, right? So when we started our Lazerpay, right, I was working at Nestcoin at the time, like I mentioned. So, the way I wanted to operate, operate a flat organization where anyone can actually have access to me. Anyone can actually bring up something and say, oh, this thing that we are doing doesn't make sense, or Njoku, this idea is stupid. This is how we can make it better, right? That was the core of the culture we wanted to create a Lazerpay. We actually did that, right? And you can't create that kind of culture and stay hidden or not being transparent, right? And then for me it was basically So I saw how like, Yele was transparent. I also saw how like, Paystack and like, Shola is actually like, transparent. And I'm like, for me, like, I don't have like, anything to like, hide. One of the things I want is like, for other like, founders or for like, builders in the space to come out and like, actually like, talk more about what they are building and like, be like an open book pretty much, right? And then like, you can actually like, see like, people that are willing to like, help you, right? So transparency for us was core because we needed to like, build certain cultures that like, Lazerpay. Our metrics were pretty much, public, both internally and externally to our investors, right? Like, it was connected directly to like, our database. So if someone makes a payment of $1, it goes there and you see like, $1. So we weren't like, hiding anything. Like, you could actually see like, our burn rates, how much we're spending, what we're spending on, right? And how that like, pretty much, and how that progressed. So I was very, very open with, I think I started with like being very, very open and honest with like the team and like, and that, actually like, set the path for me to like, be transparent in public as well. Because I mean, I'm like, what I'm doing, I'm actually like, building stuff. And I'm building stuff in a very, very like, in a new industry. So like, we don't know it all, right? Like, we learn as we go. So I'd say like, for us, right, in general, I wanted to like, build like a very open culture at Lazerpay. So for us to like do that internally, I myself as the leader of like the organization, I have to like be 100% transparent.
Sounds like there was a lot of learning lessons, some things you would do differently with respect to sort of the seriousness of the challenge of regulation and related to your burn rate and some of the things that you spent money on in advance versus sort of later on the greater focus towards sales and building out business operations. My question to you is if there was any alternative paths to shutting down that were considered. I think that there was some reporting, I don't know if it's true or not, about a valuation that you guys were unwilling to budge on as well, so which made it difficult to fundraise. So I'm curious to hear from you, what was the sort of set of criteria that you considered in advance before deciding to shut the doors in April?
Remember I said we started raising funds, right? And first off, like, the thing about like us not like, budgeting down to like, reduce the valuation is totally false. We had like a proposed like, lead investor. And then, we're raising at a $50 million valuation. So yes, we're raising at a $50 million valuation. And then like, sometime, so we signed the term sheets. They were doing the like due diligence, like, took like, 4 months and like, and also like, went past that. And like, it was pretty much time for them to like, wire the money and, and because we had already like, gone through like the DD process. And again, like I said, like we're very transparent from day one with like, look, this is what we have strongly, right? Like this was, this is our strength, right? Like, which is product building, right? We are actively like, working on setting up like, a proper business operational structure, which was doing well, right? Like, at a very small scale and like, hindered by regulations, right? We're like, so those and look at how much we're actually making. And if we're able to like, onboard XYZ businesses, we're also like, making plans to pivot the market focus down to like the Middle East, because I have like a large network there as well. And like, it's not, the Middle Eastern market is not as like, strenuous as like the Nigerian markets. We respect like regulations, right? So we already started making plans to like, even like, hire someone that would actually like, lead like, growth and like, and like, kind of like, BD and sales like in the Middle East during like, this process. So, we realized that, regulations is a blocker. We're like, what can we do? How can we fix that, right? And I mean, I accept that we actually realized that like, really, really late, right? So we started looking into like the Middle Eastern market, and we had like, all like, list of prospective businesses, and I had already reached out to like, their CEOs, like, people actually like, leading like, the organization we were targeting, right? So we're very transparent with all that, like, during this process, right? And then, they came back later and was like, the market is really bad. The valuation doesn't work for them anymore. Based on like, the analysis, this is the valuation that work. And I called the meeting with like, my co-founders and like, the management. And we're like, at this point, we needed money. So there was no way we could say, and at that point, like valuation didn't matter to me. right, anymore. I just needed to like, save the business. And because we had something great going on, right, I just needed to like, save the business. And then I remember like, when they actually like, sent like the message around like, valuation doesn't work for them anymore. I remember like, I started like, panicking. I was like, freaking out. It was as if like, the entire world was like, coming down my head, right? I started like, calling all my investors pretty much. I called Shola, I called Yele, I called the guys at 4DX, to tell them like, the situation of things and stuff. Then we now went into like, we had to like, so when once they told us that, so plan A was pretty much like, reduce the valuation as much as possible, cut down bonds like, the barest minimum, right? So we did that, we reduced the valuation, went back to them, you're like, oh, they would get back to us and stuff that they're keen to like, invest, even with like, lower valuation. And the excuse was like, the market. And like, that was the time where the crypto market was also crashing. We're able to like, extend our runway down to like, December. I think if we had like, laid off people earlier, would have extended like, our runway past December. But when it was actually like, brought up that we needed to like, lay people off, I couldn't accept it, right? I was like, does it mean that these guys are like, going to go out of like, their jobs, right? Because it's not that they're doing their jobs badly. It was just because I couldn't like, pay them. And I was like, being so emotional, I was like, no one is telling me anything. Like, I'm going to fix this and I'm going to like, bring in more money and we are going to like, keep these people, right? So that was like, the first thing that happened, right? Like I refused to like, lay off everyone. And then, months in, like then like our head of partnership became like, our chief operating officer. And, she called me and I was like, we actually have to like lay off people, right? Like we've gone 1 month. There's like, no money yet. Like, we can't keep being like, optimistic, right? Like we need to like, lay off people. I remember like, I cried, right? Like, I was like, oh my God, like, I built out like, a really great team and like, to see actually everyone like go was really, really painful. So I, sent out like, this internal like, message. And then what I did was instead of like, just getting on a call with everybody and also like everyone internally knew about like, the progress of stuff. And we're like, this thing can actually come down to like, 2 things. It's either we get more funds or, we have to like, lay off everyone. Right, pretty much, right? Like, and leave like, the core people that need to like, keep the business operational. I spoke to a lot of investors. When you're raising funds, like, when you're raising money first time, like, like when you've not started like, building the business proper or when you've not started like, when you've not started like, getting like, any traction, pretty much pre-seed stage, it's a lot easier, right? But like, when you're now raising funds at a point where it's like, what are your numbers like? I don't care about product. I don't care about kind of product you have, right? Like, how much are you making in revenue, right? So that's like a lot more tougher, right? So that was the situation where we're in. And like, one of my biggest mistakes as well was, when raising like the first round, I didn't think about like where I needed to like be to be able to raise the second round, right? And I think that's something that like, founders should actually like, do, right? Before you touch that first $1,000 from an investor, you need to have like a plan on like, where do I need to be before I either break even or like, start making money to like cover OPEX or to like, raise funds? I didn't do that. We did like, plan A, plan B, plan C, we had to then like, resort to like laying off like, employees, like, the deal didn't go through with like the proposed lead investor, wasn't because of like, valuation, but we weren't like, we weren't aligned at all, right? Like it became like, a whole messy situation. This is another like, mistake I made, right? Like another lesson pretty much, right? Like before that deal, right? I had like investors in the door that wanted to give me money, right? But I held them back off because I wanted to like, raise a specific amount, right? So I held them like, I was like, I stalled them and then was focused on this because it was not just going to like bring in 200K. It was going to bring in $1 million plus there was like a commercial agreement to it. So our business development and sales would have skyrocketed. Our numbers were going to like go insane, right? So my focus was, I'm like, oh, look at my weakness, right? These guys are coming to like, fix this thing for me, right? So my focus was there. I didn't like, listen to, like I didn't want to like, hear that you want to give me money. No, like, hold your funds, right? I'll come back later to it. I think that was also like, I should have just collected any money that came, like, I should have collected it at the point. When we're like, it became like a messy situation. We couldn't like, align on like, terms. We had to like call off the deal. And then, that was basically like us resorting to like, plan D, which was having to like, lay off our employees. And I think that was like the toughest moments, I think, in my life, where, I got to like this point where like, something that I built from ground up, right? Like the reason why I can't see it like, progress was because of like, it was because of like, funds, right? Like money pretty much. It was so emotionally and like, mentally like, draining. So I sent like, this internal letter to like everyone on the team. And then I asked people to like, schedule like a one-on-one call with me. So instead of like, just sending out a general message that, hey, you like, you're being laid off, right? Like I was like, everyone get on like, a call with me. And sorry, before like we got to like layoff, right? Like we stopped taking the management stopped taking salaries first. And then after like a month, I also got on a one-on-one call with like, the team, telling them that like, look, we'll have to like slash your salary or we have to like, let you go, right? Like so that we can actually like, have more money in the bank. And, to my greatest surprise, like, when I was talking about that, like everyone was asking me, how's your mental health, right? They weren't really like, bothered. So for me, like that was like, an extra push to like, go get some like, more money to keep like, this ship sailing. So when we got to like plan D, where we had to like resort to like laying off people on the team, I had like, this call with them. I remember like, I cried on the call, but like, I turned off my camera. Oh, like, I'm a hard guy. It was actually so emotional for me because I had already like, seen like, what wasn't working and what we could like, fix, right? And I couldn't like, I like, it was beyond my control, right? So like, I told the team and then to my greatest surprise again, right? And I think this is like one of the benefits of like, being transparent and like, open. If you're a good leader, your team will actually have your back. To my greatest surprise again, like, people were like, we want to work pro bono, right? You don't have to pay us. It doesn't have to like be recorded that like, we owe you whatever. We just want to like, work pro bono, maybe until like, when we get some of that job, right? And, I was really like amazed by that. I was surprised, but then I told them that like, look, right, like in as much as I would love you to like, work pro bono here, you all have like, lives and you need to start looking for like the next thing to like, do ASAP. I would make it my job within the next 2 weeks to, get you guys like, another role or at least an interview in like 2-3 organizations. And I actually like did that. It's like, reach out on my network. Are you hiring? Are you hiring? I have like, the best guys, plug them in, like, got to like, interview stage and stuff, right? To them like, so I literally like, texted or emailed like, people that I knew that could potentially be hiring to actually like, hire like the guys that worked at Lazerpay. So it was like, a really like, emotional one for me. And I think at the point where we're like, laying off, we had actually like, run out of runway. I think we had until like December. The like, what was advised was that we even shut down at the time. But I was like, nah, I'm not going to shut this down, right? I'm still going to like, see this through. And then like, I was like, oh, okay, how much personal funds do I have? Abdul, how much do you have? And then like, my parents were aware of like, the situation, right? Like my dad even offered to like, sell one of his houses so that, to actually like, give us funds to like invest in the company, right? Or to like, survive, right? Because I mean, it was like a very heartbreaking one for like, everyone involved, right? So December, like, came, like, I was like, I'm going to like, push this, through that. Like, I spoke to Abdul and I spoke to like, 2-3 other people that were still on the team and like, look, we have to like do what we have to do. The plan was like, pivot into like the Middle East. We are going to like, do that, right? So we kept on going, right? We were like, we're not going to just turn up the lights on our customers, right? Like, we are going to like, see that like, we actually like, make this stuff work. So that was very, very important for us. And, at the time, like, I wasn't thinking that like, I'm going to like, run into like, personal finance issues, right? Where I didn't have like, anymore. I didn't care. I was like ready to like, put everything in. And like, while still doing that, like, I know like, I texted a couple of my friends and I actually like, borrowed money from my friends, right? To actually like, keep going. We got to the point, I think, which was like, in March, April. Like, so we went for like, an investor, like, conference, that our largest investor invited us for in Kenya. I think then like, I had like lots of clarity, I spoke to my largest investors, like, I pretty much like, made peace with the fact that like, without like a lot of money, we can't push this beyond what it is. And like, for something as like, fragile as crypto, compliance regulations is something that is supposed to like be after security, compliance and regulations, right? And for you to like, get that sorted, you need a lot of money, right? And then entering into like, a new market. So that was when like, we basically like, made the piece that, we're going to like, shut it down. And then I called like, I did like, I had like, a one-on-one call with my investors and said like, look, we've tried, right? We can't keep going further. It seemed like, our life was just in hold, right? While trying to like, make this work, right? We can't continue to like, push this further. We've tried, like, and it's not like, it's not working. And then we just made that decision in April, shut it down. It was like a very, very hard one. Like before I could actually like, come to the fact that, we're shutting down, it actually like, took like, a lot for me to like, accept that we needed to like, shut down and like, move on to, other things.
Yeah. And I mean, I think inside of that story, the entire story, and especially the last, 4 or 5 months, there's a lot of key lessons that you learned, some hard-earned lessons, right, for you as a young founder and, starting your first company. I'm curious to know if there's maybe like a key lesson or one key lesson that you have to take away, or, like one or two key pieces of advice that you have for either, your younger self or for other, young founders who have similar aspirations as you do.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have like a lot of lessons, like, learned from this, and I've like, gotten to the point where I no longer see Lazerpay as a failure, but, I see us as like, we did our best and, we learned like, lessons, right? We actually learned hard lessons. So I would call it like, lessons instead of like, failure, right? Yeah, I have like, a lot. I remember one time, right? Like, so there's this book I read, like, while going through all this stuff, Hard Things About Hard Things. I started reading it like this year. But like, when I traveled to like, London, friend CEO of Lorry System, he saw me, I was like a total mess. So that was when I was like, trying to like raise money. And, he hugged me for like 5 minutes. And he was like, I can see that you're going through. But he now recommended the book. Say, read this book, Hard Things About Hard Things. But then like, in the spur of the moment, like, I need money. I don't want to like, read any book. So I like, dropped the book one side and I went on to like, other stuff. But like, later, Yele recommended it again. And I was like, oh, okay. Now I'm not looking for money. So I can actually like, read it. And that was when I started like, getting like, comfortable with the fact that we're going to like, shut down the company. So back to like, lessons, right? One key one for me was that if I was like, start this again, I would, the way I was like, taking product development, I'll take business development and sales that seriously. It doesn't have to be enterprise sales. Like, I'll take BD, and business development is not just about selling to enterprise, right? Business development is more of, is also like, looking at like, like your market, tweaking like, business models, adding like, talking to like, the product team as well. Like, basically building that like very intertwined and like, close relationship between like the business development team and like the product team, right? So I had like this definition of like, product-led growth in my head. And, I thought I was like, operating like, a product, like, led, growth organization. And then as I started like, reading stuff and like, started experiencing like, these things, it now became like, clear that, oh, fuck, I've been doing the wrong thing, right? Where I was abstracting product development from like, BD and sales, but in the real sense of like, product-led growth, sales, BD, compliance, regulations, growth, marketing, everything had to like, come down to like, product development. So product development needed to be at the center of all these things happening, right? That's usually the definition of product-led growth. They're not saying ignore BD or ignore sales. They're like at the center of like, your product organization needs to be at the center of every other thing happening. That like no product is going to like, go out there without like, the BD team saying, oh, how can we tweak this business model to work? And regulations is like, oh no, like in this market, we potentially run into like XYZ issues, right? Like, why don't we try all that stuff, right? So it was like, we're building and like, we're just building, right? So there wasn't this like, close relationship between BD and product team. So next time, like, the way I take product building seriously, I'm going to like, take like business development, business operations, like, really, really seriously as well. So I think like founders should not like, ignore that part of the business, because a great product without like a good business model or a good business is a bad business in general, right? And you're not just building a product, you're building a business, right? So founders should actually like, and me, myself, if I'm starting another thing again, like that would be like, the first lesson, like, I'm bringing to like, what I'm building next. So I would say the second thing, the second like, hard lesson was actually like, a high bond pretty much, right? Was that we didn't need to like, spend that much to achieve what we wanted to like achieve. When I look back at it in like, retrospect, I'm like, we could have actually achieved the same thing with like a team of 10 people and not like a team of 25 people, right? So the problem wasn't even how much I was paying, how much we're paying salaries. I think like, when the media thing came out and, we're like, oh, why are you paying this much? I'm like, they have to like, be very, very comfortable. So it wasn't really about like, how much we're spending on like, on like, employees, but it was more around like the number of employees like, needed to actually take again. And that's why, back to like, the other lesson I talked about, right? Like whenever you're taking money or whenever you're starting a business, right, you need to like, know where you want to be in like the next 1 year, next 2 years. Like that goal must be very clear. And it's like, when that goal is set, it's like, what do we need to get here? And how much will it cost for us to like, get to like this point? And like, track every single data, like, no data should be left, untracked, right? On monitored, right? Track every single thing and make sure that, you're actually like, on track to actually achieving your goals. The goal remains the same, but like what you do daily is like, very important. So that guy will actually affect and control how much you spend. And it's like, you don't have to like, hire 25 people. You know that, oh, what we need to like get to X points to make XYZ is, 2 people, is 3 people. Right, like these are like the number of people that we need to like get that stuff done, right? So that's like very, very, very important as well. Like having a sense of where you want to be in the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and like planning like based on that. So we didn't really need like that much people on the team. And then like another lesson I learned that we applied, which I'm going to like apply again and apply over again, is like lesson of like communicating like with your investors, being totally transparent and being totally like, open, whatever you're actually like, doing within the organization, right? It's not like without your team and without like everybody being in the know of like what's going on, like then like, that's like the beginning of like, chaos in your organization, right? So that's something that like, we're very open, we're very transparent. That's something like, we did really well. And we prioritized our customers as well. So that's also something great that we actually like, did well. Like our customers were like, number one on like, our funnel, right? So we prioritize them, make sure that they never, like if they run into any issues, we like, fix instantly, we listen to them and like, iterate as we go. So we actually like, had like a very, very good structure with like, listening to like, customers and like, making like, the product and the platform work for them.
Thank you. I guess one thing I want to close with a thought, which is a question that you have received a lot, I'm sure. I've received from people who are asking me like if I can get in your head, and I obviously can't. But the question is, what's next? And maybe I also rephrase that by saying, are you still feeling optimistic about the future of crypto in Africa?
About crypto, right? Like I got into crypto in 2019. So my entire career around crypto has not been about like buying and selling shit coins or like, trying to like make money from crypto. My entire career around crypto has been that like, I see what this technology can do and I'm like, how can we leverage this technology to actually like bring a lot of impact and value to like our society? So that's like, there's just a lot of value that can be created from like, crypto and blockchain technology in general. So it's not even about like, the price of Ethereum or the price of Bitcoin. That never like, concerns me, right? So whether there's like, a bull market or a bear market, my stance on crypto remains the same, right? I'm very, very like, bullish around like, about crypto. And, I'm also bullish about like, payments and like, stable coins, right? Like, you can see how crypto can actually like, bring like borders in Africa, like, borders, in Africa actually together, right? Where, people can like, move money around the world, like, instantly, like, I can send, 10,000 USD, 100,000 USDT to like, someone in Singapore, sitting from like, my house in Port Harcourt, like, and it gets to them like, in 1 minute, right? Like, which other technology does that, right? So crypto has like a lot of like potential, and I'm still bullish about like, potentials of crypto. And like, it's now my life's mission to like, see that like, we actually like, drive the adoption of crypto globally, right? And in Africa, when people are asking like, what's next, and I'm like, you guys should just chill, right? Like, I'm just like, I'm coming out of this thing, still trying to like process like, more of my thoughts and like, get like things together pretty much. And also like get my finances in order because like, Lazerpay drained everything pretty much. For me, right, like I think what's next for me, I don't know. I don't know what I'll be doing in like, the next 2 years. I don't know what I'll be doing in the next 5 years. But like one thing is sure, and I also like, said it, that what I know how to like do best is actually like, build stuff, build solutions for like, problems. And I'll keep doing that. But like the exact thing I'm doing next, I don't really know. So for me, it's like, taking time to like, think about like the lessons learned and just like, reflect on what has happened and like, get better and also like, garner more experience as well. So like, do whatever comes next.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. So I think we should leave it there and just wrap up today's discussion. But Njoku, I think on behalf of Guerra and me, we really appreciate you joining us and telling the story. I hope it wasn't too painful to recount some of those memories. But I think everyone is still interested in what's next. They'll give you the time and the space. But, with Lazerpay shutting down, where can more people follow along on your journey and see whatever's next for you?
I think Twitter for me, Njoku Script on Twitter. I think Njoku Script, like, on all, like, my social media accounts. Yeah, GitHub, like, everything Njoku Script. Yeah.
And you can find us on Twitter at Crypto@Scale. And if you enjoyed this episode, please do hit that follow button on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube and share with a friend or colleague who you think may enjoy it as well. Njoku, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Njoku.
Thanks a lot, guys.